Good afternoon to members of SEPS and any other people that have joined for this webinar on EU-Iran relations as seen through the prism of a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape, or the great reordering, as we called it in the title. We've seen, of course, that 10 years after the JCPOA, the US has adopted various positions. Under Trump 1, he withdrew the US from the nuclear deal, and in a second stint at the White House is intent on doubling down on the pressure to make sure that the clerical regime in Tehran plays by the rules that he will set, and has opened an invitation for talks, indirect or direct, which have received a mixed response from Tehran, which we'll hear more about. At the same time, Mr. Trump has, of course, been upping the pressure by saying that if they don't come to an agreement, he will bomb the hell out of the Iranians. That's my paraphrasing. We are nevertheless in this very peculiar situation also in a wider Middle East, which has seen turmoil, and then I'm putting it mildly, over the last couple of months in Gaza, of course, with Israel picking up a new fight there across the border, northern border into Lebanon. We've seen Russia retreat partially, for the most part, at least from Syria, opening extra avenues for Turkey. And so Saudi Arabia, of course, has played host to various other negotiations. We've seen the US already bombing the Houthis in Yemen. Many pieces are up in the air at the moment, and we will discuss only some of them, I suppose, in more detail. With us, we have Majid Golpour, returning to SEPS to brief us on all matters Iran in today's webinar, particularly from the nuclear file. And Majid, of course, is well known to you as a partner and consultant, but also as a fellow at the University of Brussels, the ULB, that is. So welcome back to SEPS, although virtually, Majid. And of course, Ambassador Jim Moran, also known to everyone here on the call, who is a senior associate fellow at SEPS and previously, under many different guises, of course, an EU diplomat, having served as ambassador in Egypt, Yemen, point man for Libya, and many other tasks and responsibilities. We have agreed among ourselves that both lead speakers will take around 7-8 minutes for their opening remarks, after which I'll engage them in a conversation and throw it open for questions and observations from the audience. Please already use the Q&A section or the chat section in Zoom to give us a bit of a head start, and raise your hand if you would like to come in with an oral question. Majid, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephen. And just, I hope I will be under 8 minutes. Because I write just my text for you. In 2024, political instability and regional conflict, from Russia's invasion of Ukraine to the Middle East crisis, disrupt supply chains and spike raw material prices and fuel global inflation. But that was just the beginning. As we enter 2025, the world stands fractured, with rising rivalry driven by a new geopolitical shift. The inauguration of Donald Trump on January 20 seals America's retreat from multilateralism, embracing a transactional worldview where power, not principle, guides foreign policy. Global growth stagnated at 3%, crushed under the weight of an unprecedented $307 trillion debt for the war. Trump's America First doctrine resurged with brutal intensity, erecting tariff walls and shattering the last illusion of international cooperation. This time, Trump does not just seek economic dominance, he imposes his MAGA, a piece of bargaining where military force will be the law. Regions from Ukraine to Greenland, Panama to Gaza are reduced to mere pawns on a chessboard of American interest driven not by ideals, by economic calculation. This is no mere trade war. It is a systemic reorganization of global power and global order. Through tariffs and economic coercion, Washington forces foreign economies to invest in American industries, using protectionism as a tool for national revival. Simultaneously, the US embarked on a financial offensive seeking to salvage the dollar while leveraging foreign investment to secure technological supremacy in AI, cybersecurity, big data, and aerospace. This sets the stage of an unprecedented economic financial war, where America is willing to sacrifice its democratic legacy to maintain brute power. For Europe, this spells an existential crisis. To survive the shockwaves of this new global order, it must cease being a passive player. Europe must mobilize its resources to assert leadership, refocus on its internal market, redefine its strategic alliance, and enhance its strategy and technological autonomy. This is vital to avoiding becoming a subordinate power dependent on American whims. Meanwhile, the Iranian nuclear crisis continues to intensify. In 2023, the number of states involved conflict reached a historical high, with the Middle East remaining a key point of instability. Europe, which played a central role in negotiating the 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal, is now confronted with Iran's violation of the agreement, and as a result, the EU may be forced to activate the snapback mechanism, restoring the full range, sorry for my accent, of international sanctions, despite opposition from China and Russia, while Moscow pushed for indirect negotiation and Beijing takes advantage of discounted Iranian oil. The International Agency of Energy, IAEA, latest report is alarming. Iran's stockpile now exceeds 8,294 kilo of enriched uranium, and including 274 at 60%, dangerously close to weapon-grade level. That was once a manageable crisis is now directly linked to the Israel-Iran conflict, raising the potential for a wider escalation, including US involvement. Ayatollah Khamenei, who resisted both war and diplomacy during the Trump's first term, is now compelled to engage in negotiation, surely indirect, all while preparing for the possibility of conflict. As the legitimate guarantor of the JCPOA, Europe has a critical role to play in stabilizing the region. It must recalibrate its approach by incorporating key regional powers, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, even Turkey, into a new diplomatic framework. This goes beyond simply preventing the militarization of Iran's nuclear program. Europe must work to form an integrated strategy that combines security and economic opportunities. By doing so, it can ensure long-term stability in the Middle East while strengthening its own strategic position on the global stage. Thank you for your attention. I hope I'm under 8 minutes, Stephen.
Thank you, Majid. What I retain from some of the things I retain from your presentation are not just, the US's choice of economic means and pressure, but in particular your appeal to the Europeans, i.e. E3, which includes the EU, to step forward in providing security guarantees of a sort, not like the ones we have in Ukraine, but rather as a role of stability provider in a new diplomatic framework, which would include regional powers as well, to salvage whatever was in the JCPOA and go forward with that. Jim, any reactions to these points, to some of the other ones that Majid made, and perhaps an invitation also to you to extrapolate a little bit to the parts of the region that you know better?
Yeah, security guarantees coming from Europe are always quite a challenge, as we're seeing at the moment, of course, in the Ukrainian context. But I agree there could be some potential for that. As regards the diplomacy, which Majid mentioned, going on at the moment from the E3, I think the difficulty there is going to be, of course, getting some measure of American buy-in. History shows us that we cannot have much of a prospect for the JCPOA extension, whatever, without that. And on that one, we're getting a lot of confusing signals from the Americans on Iran. Maximum pressure, as was said, is applied, but there's also talk of diplomacy. Mr. Trump was talking about that the other day. Some people are even talking about Mr. Putin as a mediator between Washington and Tehran, but I think that's going a bit far. I mean, that said, I'm turning to the region a little bit now, how this plays in. The heavy US attacks on the Houthis the other day show that Trump is not averse to military action in the region, and he did indeed say that something to the effect of every Houthi shot he looked upon as a shot fired from weapons and leadership of Iran. But those attacks, I don't think, stay with the Houthis for a moment, because it is an important factor in the bigger picture. Those attacks, I don't think, are going to deter the Houthis. They're battle hardened from years of strikes, first from Saudi Arabia and now from the US. And I would fully expect them to regroup in their mountain strongholds and probably start again sometime very soon. Now, Iran has been weakened regionally, no doubt, about after the cowing of Hezbollah in Lebanon, the fall of Assad, setbacks in Iraq and other things. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why we've seen Tehran more interested in diplomatic solutions, re-engaging with the E3, despite the lack of trust and so on. But the Houthis remain largely intact and remain useful also to Iran, sort of a little Sparta in the Arabian underbelly, as somebody has called it. And as the Israeli bombs fall again on Gaza, Lebanon, and settler attacks continue apace in the occupied West Bank, the Houthis continue to get quite a bit of support in the Arab street, including at home in Yemen. They're seen as part of the resistance to Israeli aggression, even if their agenda is actually as much about that as it is about consolidating their power at home in Yemen. Now, given that Europe and Egypt, of course, pay the main price for the Houthi campaign, literally through disruption of Red Sea trade, I think the Europe would do well to work more intensively with Gulf countries, Egypt and the UN, in encouraging stability in Yemen, not least in bringing opposition elements there in the south together in their attempts to curb Houthi influence. And I think the EU could also do more to build stability in Syria. You mentioned that, Stephen, in your introduction, beyond humanitarian assistance, so as to avoid a resurgence of influence from Iran and indeed from Russia over there. Clear condemnation of current Israeli land grabs east of the occupied Golan Heights and of its renewed military campaign in Lebanon, I think, is also needed, although prospects for that are not perhaps as great as they should be. Now, and that leads me back to a thread that runs through much of this, and it leads back to West Jerusalem to Israel, which is more influential than ever on American positions in Iran with the advent of the Trump administration, and is acting aggressively and with impunity throughout the region in the mistaken notion that their so-called Netanyahu's reset of the Middle East can somehow be based on military might in producing peace and stability, among other things. Normalization with Saudi Arabia is off the agenda, partly because of the Israeli policies, contradicts their original approach. And given that West Jerusalem is emboldened by the apparent success of these campaigns, there's a real and present danger that Netanyahu's dream of a strike on Iran will become reality. The likely result, of course, would be that Iran goes for the bomb. And that will be disastrous for everyone, including in the Gulf, not least in Saudi Arabia, which has been trying with a rapprochement with Iran, with the Chinese brokered agreement a year or two ago, and so on. And given that the American ability to rein in the Israelis is very limited, in fact, it's virtually nil in my estimation, perhaps the time has come for Europe to make it clear to Israel that there is a high price to pay if they continue with warmongering in the occupied territories and elsewhere. There is notional leverage for Europe. It can suspend the association agreement with Israel. It can end military support if Israel refuses to return to the ceasefire agreement and accepts that Georgia is the way to an enduring peace settlement with the Palestinians. But even if that might not be enough to deter Israel under its current government, such measures could substantially improve the EU's credibility in diplomatic efforts to restore trust and engage Iran. But does Europe have the wherewithal to rise to that sort of challenge, not given the preoccupation, understandable preoccupation with events in Ukraine and elsewhere, given the divisions within Europe, given the lack of leadership at the moment in Europe, at least in the institutions, I think, towards a more balanced approach to the problems of the Middle East. Given all these things, let's be honest and say that it's not terribly likely that that will be the case. And so long as we continue with this endless war in the Middle East, spurred by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think we're going to have all kinds of difficulties going forward, not least with the re-engagement with Iran. And the situation just becomes increasingly dangerous. I think there's a lot to worry about here.
Thanks very much, Jim, for casting a wider net. The attendees will have seen the post made by Seps in the chat that you should use the Q&A function to pose your questions, and then we'll deal with them in turn. Oh, sorry. I wanted to turn back to both Majid as well as Jim. As to the timing question, Europe, but also the US and Russia are clearly preoccupied with Ukraine at the moment. And if I read the tea leaves correctly, then Washington is seeing what the Europeans are perceiving as a certain alignment with Russia over Ukraine as a way of a reset to then deal with hotter potatoes. Iran, comes to mind, and then of course the big prize would be China. How imminent is then any breakthrough in the current stalemate over the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, and where do you think it will come from? Would it come from Russia? Would it come from the US or from other perhaps regional powers? Majid?
Yes, I think we must, we can say, take some distance from a naive approach to understand the current war and also whatever is this template of geopolitics on the world and especially in Middle East. And with the tools we had before 2003, 2002, we cannot understand the war if we don't understand first the mind of Putin and also now, especially Trump, who tried to be a part of the deal with not only Putin, but also perhaps with China. So what I want to say, for me today, we have two very important mechanisms. Mechanism of, we can call it zone d'influence, means all the power try to see where they can put more their attention and resources and make some future for themselves. And also with the alliance, how they can secure whatever we can say as a strategy, their future. For the moment, the word of Russian word is a map word. They look at the world as they say that Russia have any limited in their board. They can really act anywhere. And Middle East, I think, is a very good idea for understand how they act. When they start with Al-Qaeda and then Daesh, and then after they understood they can have a lot of network, they have a regional map security. And this is why with their approach of some package of security to all these countries, including Egypt, including, we can say it now, Saudi Arabia, and unfortunately, and some other countries in Africa, they have really another understanding of the new world. This is why I think even for the nuclear crisis, Ayatollah Khamenei, he refused to have some negotiation with Trump as the first turn of Trump. This time he was very radical. You said it is not rational to have some dialogue with US, but with the lobbying of US, with Russia, and asking Putin to involve himself on this dossier, now we have acceptance of Khamenei for indirect dialogue. Means now we will have the Russian on this dossier in Oman to open a new, we can say, chapter for a new deal who will not be JCPOA. And this is why I think it is very pity for Europe, because we have the legacy of this dossier since now 20 years, to see in parallel the Russian, they took in somehow, we can set some, in terms of competitivity of their diplomacy, because they are returned now to UN. They want to also bring Ukrainian case to UN for have some international world legacy for their annexion, and the JCPOA business is the same. This is why I think really European, we must have a real competitive with much more initiative in terms of making the new alliance, not only for Europe around the world, but also in Middle East for Europe. And this is why I think now is time to see, when I speak about the guarantee or the security guarantee for Middle East, it is not defense or military guarantee, it is the economic, and to show we are not empty hand, we have some capacity to protect, to absorb a part of difficulty of this region. So for put some point on this part of opinion, I think really we must be much more creative and understand the competitive madness we have in front of us coming from Russia and unfortunately US.
Jim, before I turn to you, I just wanted to follow up with Majid on one particular item, which is, Majid, if the JCPOA, if the thresholds which Iran has already surpassed are enough reason, you know, for a snapback, then surely, whilst all parties are still wedded to it and the EU is supervising it, the EU would have to impose sanctions, thereby limiting its own ability for, you know, economic creativity, as you mentioned. So how does this square?
And this is why we must think it now. If we want to go to sanction, first we must calculate what we win with our sanctions. To bring back all the sanctions, at least we must do a kind of management of all the sanctions, means US, Canada, even Australia, and Europe. So we need to understand, we can set a kind of new proposal for the neighborhood like Saudi Arabia, like Emirat, like Bahrain, like Qatar, even Egypt, to make them understand if we bring back the sanctions for Iran, we need a kind of new alliance with them because our sanction, it wasn't so successful. So this is why I suggest we can bring back a new package of security for economic on this area to put very clearly all the sanctions combined, international sanctions combined, to understand with our allies on the region how we will reinforce this sanction on all these institutions and players, because also they are the enemy of all these countries, and also bring kind of new promotion. We cannot systematic these sanctions and bring any promotion. We must bring a kind of promotion for the people, for the healthy economy, for the, we can say, whitelist people who they are really integrated in our international economy, and they have the right to survive on this very, we can say, hard situation. This is why I think really we need to remap whatever proposal we have these last 10 years and understand 18 October, it will be the deadline for snapback. And the Russian and the Chinese, they are really afraid from our initiative. But on this initiative, we must be very clever and very multi-level. It is not just bring back a sanction for sanction, because it's not the beauty of sanction can help Europe to make a kind of message of hope for Middle East. We really have short time between the war and all this, we can say, ugly communication of Trump. We need a very comprehensive, balance, and also very smart targeting of the enemies of democracy and promotion for the people who they want to really change the situation.
Thank you. Jim, Majid makes a compelling case. How realistic is it, given your reading of the main geopolitical actors' positions?
Well, you asked where the breakthrough might come from originally, Stephen. I'm not entirely sure where it would come from. The Russia relationship is very ambiguous, isn't it? I mean, in terms of how they regard all of this. On the one hand, you've got the traditional concerns about non-proliferation, and there was a time way back in the JCPOA where they were cooperating pretty closely with the E3 and everybody else on that. But on the other, you've also got the lethal aid that's being provided still to Russia for the Ukraine war from Iran, and the relationship with Iran is, as a result, I think, a little bit cloudy, to say the least. How that would play into a re-energizing of the JCPOA, frankly speaking, I think is anybody's guess. But going back to the point on the JCPOA, or whatever replaces it, it's just very hard to see how, no matter what the offer is coming from Europe, whether it be the sort of economic plan that Majid has been mentioning, or a new alliance of some kind, it's very hard to see it happening without some measure of buy-in from the US. I'm afraid that the US still has very important position there. And US policy is not always made in Washington. In fact, very frequently it's made elsewhere. It's made in West Jerusalem on the Middle East, and more so than ever with the current situation that we find with the Trump administration in power. And there, I think, once again, I'm sorry to go back to it, we have to look further afield, and we have to look at the situation with the Israelis, which again has complicated the business in a very fundamental way, and has also meant that Europe's credibility in terms of its offer, whether it be security, whether it be economic, has also reduced, I think, European influence in the region. The trust that we once had in North Africa and the Middle East, for example, is not there anymore, and needs to be rebuilt. We're not doing a very good job on that at the moment. Our credibility as Europe is not where it once was. And that needs to be addressed and quickly. There is the new pact for the Mediterranean, which has some potential. There is the new outreach to the Gulf, a new concentration on the importance of relationships there, the talk of a revival of a free trade agreement with the GCC, for example, that sort of thing, but it's not getting very far at the moment. And it seems that every time a little bit of energy goes into one or other of these things, it gets derailed or at least put on the back burner because of the preoccupation we have, again, understandably so, with a solution in Ukraine, which takes priority over all of this for Europe. There's no doubt about that. So where does the breakthrough come from? Frankly, I don't know, Steve. I really don't.
I sense that your reading of the situation is one where, in fact, Europe has hardly any cards to play in this entire context. I mean, it's clutching at straws in a way. Whereas, is there any merit, nonetheless, Jim, in using the geoeconomic arguments that Majid is putting forward? And you mentioned a couple of them already, which are circumstantial in a way. Could they be addressed more head-on with the Iranians themselves at one point? Rethinking the entire sanctions package is what Majid calls for, with a carrot in return. Can this be done in splendid isolation? Probably not. And then what is the alliance around that to support it? A question by George Robakidze in the Q&A function of Zoom also points to other actors which we haven't mentioned that far. Turkey, some of the South Caucasus states. So what's your thinking on this, Jim?
Well, I mean, European influence and economic clout in Iran, of course, has also been reduced to a great extent, not least because of the sanctions. I don't know how many European companies still are operating there. Very, very few, if any. So this means that Iran, of course, has been turning elsewhere for its main economic relationship, not least to China, over the last few years, where it sells most of its oil and where it gets a great many of its imports, and of course with Russia. So the European influence relationship, economic relationship with Iran, and I'd like to hear Majid's thought on that, doesn't seem to be terribly important at the moment. And whether or not the Iranians would want to, would take that very seriously as an offer, I don't know. Certainly it would involve a complete reordering and re-engineering of the sanctions package. As you say, Stephen, some incentives would need to be put into that. Would that be something that Europe could do without worrying about some sort of secondary sanction cost to be paid for vis-a-vis the Americans? I'm not so sure.
And presumably only after a ceasefire agreement has been struck between Russia and Ukraine, which also thereby denies a role in that respect. Yeah, Majid, I wanted to turn.
Yes, I want to add three. This is really very, very short, we can say, the element of reflection. First, we are thinking always the government and also perhaps some big companies. And this is perhaps one of the mistake we have in our category of tools, economical tools, when we approach Middle East. I think now it's time we think more the integration, the whole market. I speak about market of Middle East. And in this market, we have 400 consumers. And on this area, we are very competitive and we have a lot of experts. And I think one of the aspects to protect our interest in Middle East by the sanctions is to think about the Middle East market. How all this damage coming from the people with the illegitimate business pass in their country, they cannot anymore even survive on this Middle East market. This is the big question. I think we will have Saudi Arabia, Emirates, even Egypt and Turkey and some very more important even companies with us. They want to understand how they can secure the Middle East market, not European market. On this, I have some proposal, but it is not the subject of the we can set our discussion of today. The second, about the JCPOA, what is the main, we can say, element of high-level risk on this nuclear program of Republic Islamic is the orientation they can have with the military activities. And this is why we create JCPOA, to somehow have some surveillance, some control. So now it's time to, we must really do some, we can say, beyond the tap to understand where we are and why we are not able to really bring a very hopeful, successful result of these 10 years of JCPOA. It was, we liberate more than $200 billion Iranian money, and we take it on the hand of all these illegitimate people without any control on market and also on technology. Here, I think is another area we must think about. Can we have a kind of nuclear activities, civil and comprehensive, who from the, we can say, A to Z, can be protected and controlled by Middle East people. And I think on this, I have at least some proposal, but again, today is not, we have not enough time. Means we can bring a competitive project of nuclear activities who from the first state cannot have the military orientation. And perhaps these can replace all this ping pong of the negotiation we had in Vienna without any result. And the third and the last, I think it's really time now for Europe to consider ourselves, because I am Iranian or French, we can say citizen, we must consider and we must think as a global power on this world. We are not here just for dialogue. We are here for construction of this world. And this is why I think it's very, we can say, urgent to have a new policy, at least, on this very, very high-level risk, who is the collaboration between Russia and all these countries, starting by Republic Islamic, in terms of ballistic and military activities. Who is the second element of, we can say, risk, but we are not really closely look at this level as European, we can say, the unity. So this is why I think really it's not just intellectual debate. I think we have a very practical and also existential level of problem who we must face, and we must make ourselves ready to really take challenge and perhaps some proposal in academic, but also in practical level, and see how we can act as a European unity.
Majid, I sense a Jean Monnet in you. The idea of a common regional market and
yes, if you see
atomic
my
energy
first map,
agency for the region, smacking of Euratom. We take your point. Just a quick reaction, perhaps, by Jim.
Well, yes, I mean, that's very ambitious, which is to say that why not in a way. But I think in terms of economic engagement with the region, a very important part of it would be to open up trade and investment with the Gulf countries. If you could do that in parallel with incentives offered to Iran, which of course is pretty well integrated as well, with the Gulf countries, then that might be something to look at. The trouble is that we've been 20 years at it in Europe, trying to move on with the FTA, with the GCC. There is now talk about going bilateral with some of the countries. The Emirates, of course, are very keen to do that. The Saudis are less interested. But to get the region to engage in that way on a common economic area, at least at the level of a free trade agreement, is already very, very difficult. But that is not to say that we should not persevere, not least in the European interest.
The idea, Jim,
more energy put into.
Can I ask one question to Jim?
Yeah.
Jim, we can say that my motivation is not to have some polemic. I'm here just for really debate and to see how we can focus on. So I think we had a lot of wrong approach with the Middle East market. But with Stephen, we worked a lot about some European center, office center, even for Iran, and we had some, we can say, advancement on this. Now I want to bring some challenge to you. Do you think we can have a kind of European business center everywhere on Middle East? If Stephen is enough kind for me, with me, and for me put the first map of the market of Middle East and Europe is my first page of. Do you think if tomorrow we decide to have a European business center everywhere, it is really business? It is just all our entrepreneurs. They are already in. I was there in Bahrain or Emirat, but work as a unity. And top of this, if we bring a kind of European business passport.
Yeah.
About European business passport means the people, they can have visa from Middle East with a very clear-cut presentation of their business, and they are welcome to Europe, and also they are welcome to bring us to Middle East. But we never think about all of this.
I've had some experience of this over the years. The European chambers of commerce that have been established in many countries. Best example is in Beijing, by the way, which has been very effective, bringing European economic interests, both at the company level and the government level, in as one, and having an influence from time to time, even on Chinese policy. But that is the exception, not the rule. In the Gulf, there are many, many, many business organizations up and down, whether you go to Riyadh, whether you go to Manama, wherever you are, you'll find chambers of commerce from Europe, usually almost always by the member states. But getting the member states themselves to cooperate as one in the European context is very, very difficult. In fact, it's almost impossible unless you have something like a free trade agreement in place. Then that brings them together. That's why I keep banging on a little bit about the importance of new trading agreements, investment agreements with the countries there. Without it, business won't operate on a European level. It will operate very much on a national level. So that seems to me to be priority number one in terms of advancing European integration through the markets with the area. Long way to go, I'm afraid, Majid, on that one.
If Stephen, allow me just to say, this is why I think for have any theological conflict with EU to have sovereignty of this country or that country, to have the possibility to decide everything all together, I think for go beyond of the theological aspect of EU, the market can open so many areas. And this is why I have a proposal for a new diplomacy. We can resume it as a pro-business diplomacy for Europe, who can go even with all the country, including Hungary and Czech and others who they have some theological problem for this or that, with a very clear idea how we can do business everywhere and how we must promote this business, because it's the base of our, we can say, fundamental value is to have this capacity and possibility. And especially where we have the black business, we must bring a white business, balanced business.
Majid, if I may press you on that point.
Yes.
Because in Iran,
Yes.
we have this, political military complex, of course, revolutionary guards, big in business, infiltrating everywhere, creaming off proceeds, etc. How can trust be really built in an economic sense without going through, those very institutions? Which
very clear. We had, Stephen, the discussion of free trade zone. We have 19 in Iran, like Dubai. We have in Kish or Edge. We are speaking business, and on this, all is depend of your platform. How keen you are in IT level and in we can say very competitive tools in your hand. How you have the distinction between the people, companies on white and black list. And if your list is business, I think even we can have the collaboration coming from inside of this country, because they need bring up the level of their economy. And this is why, for me, the problem of a military war, we cannot separate with the economical war. In Iran, at least we have 3 bombs. We have explosion of social bomb right now, with 50% of population under poverty. We have also economical bomb, and perhaps also we will have this atomic bomb. So this is why we must change a little bit our perspective, and to see how we can integrate our interests with the interest of the consumer in Middle East. And this is why I think we are lacking the tools. And I am sure when you go on this area, you will have a lot of support. And I have other suggestions, but the time is short, and I don't want.
No, that's okay. Jim, can this be a self-regulatory, self-disciplinary environment, you think? This network of free trading zones?
Probably not. No, I think it would be hard. You need always some sort of dispute settlement authority to oversee it. You need acceptance of that. It's not on the horizon at the moment. It's a good ambition perhaps to have, but how we get from here to there in this region in particular, in the Gulf, I don't quite see it happening at the moment. It will take a lot of energy on the part of the European institutions, above all the European Commission, which of course has the authority here in trade and investment negotiations, a lot of energy for that to happen. And I don't see it appearing as a top priority on the agenda of this commission under von der Leyen. I don't think the effort is there at the moment to really make advancement, make a credible offer to the Gulf on these matters, even if some member states are very keen to do it. But across the continent, we're not there yet. There is, of course, also the preoccupations that the Commission has at the moment with what is happening with the world trading system, the WTO, the American tariffs, Trump's tariffs, the attack on multilateral trading system. All of that is taking up a lot of energy. I don't know where it's going to come from. But as an ambition, I certainly take Majid's point. This is an essential part of the picture going forward if we are to improve the situation in the region and to do the best by European interests there. But don't see it happening anytime soon.
I would like to reserve time, I think, for another conversation to unpack some of these more visionary proposals that you've put here on the virtual table, Majid. For now, I would like to keep a shorter time perspective,
Yes.
at least because we only have 9 minutes still for this webinar. But Jim, first to you, and then back to Majid. How do you read the evolution of the position formed by the E3 over the last couple of months? Where do you think this is headed?
It's a very, very good question. Information coming out of these exchanges is, of course, very hard to get hold of. I think there have been 3 encounters between the E3 and the counterparts there in Iran over the last few months. Quite where they are, frankly, Stephen, I don't have any special information to impart so far as that is concerned. There is, as has been said, I mean, we haven't got much time. I mean, 21st of October, I think, is the date for the expiration of the JCPOA. If there's going to be a re-engineered sanctions approach, I don't quite know what they're going to do. No question that there needs to be some concentration on incentives. But as I keep saying, I mean, all of this is fine, but if you don't do something about or you don't have some influence on maximum pressure approach of the Americans backed up by the Israelis or somehow teleguided by the Israelis on Iran, I'm not really sure where we're going to go with it. Even if you manage to re-engineer the sanctions packages, we all know that so long as the Americans take the view that they do, it's very hard for European companies particularly to get around it, because you end up paying the price of secondary sanctions and so on. Even the Chinese are worried about that.
Well, then perhaps that, I'm not sure if that would be a moment where the anti-coercion instrument of the EU might be finally deployed to try and blunt any such effort by the Treasury Department in Washington. We have, by the way, a participant from DG FISMA, I see, online, so perhaps she wants to chip in on the sanctions bit. But I leave that entirely open. I see also another question still in the chat, or two more, in fact. I mean, one, Sivash, if you could reformulate that perhaps in writing, that would really help if you could pin that down on the EU-Iran connection that we are trying to explore in this webinar. And then there's a question by Erwan Fouere, a colleague of ours at CEPS, who asked, a number of EU leaders vaunt their prowess as Trump whisperers. Yes, we saw Alexander Stubb donning his golf gear this weekend and showing off with him next to Trump in Florida, or at least, in Florida. He asked, which Trump whisperers, which EU leader, if any, is best placed to educate and influence Trump on what needs to be done towards Israel and, of course, Iran? Majid, I put that also to you, and then back afterwards to Jim.
Yes, I'm in Paris. I'm without any doubt, I can say Macron have now a very nice, we can say, the potential, more than potential, capacity to really promote, and we must be proactive. Even for E3, about the time is very short in this 4 months, because I think around September, October, we will have Russia in head of this UN business, and if we activate snapback, is better we do it before July. But whatever, coming to this proactivity, to this, we can say, the visionary. James said is a visionary, is very ambitious plan, but I didn't express my real ambition. The real ambition for me is to be able to integrate and connect 400 million Middle East people to European platform of economic of growth and well-being, and enjoy like us, because the base of democracy we offer to all these people must be very we can say, healthy. And this is why I think is a very good time for Europe, especially in these 3 months, lifting for our, we can say, the collaborator of E3. They must bring some proposal who makes sense to the Iranian, and also all these people, really they are very, we can say, they lost all their hope about Europe. We must be very clear in how we can change mutually the situation in all the aspects, especially on the first in economical level. And Europe have all the capacities, the expertise, the experience, and the, we can say, the facilities we have in our network. And going on this, Stephen, I want to finish with a very message of hope. I think about the nuclear activity in Iran, we can be much more involved, even with other countries, starting by Saudi Arabia. And Zarif tried to make sense on this level in his very ambiguous article in Economist before resignation. But I think in these 3 months, we have enough time to connect quickly now Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and all Emirates about how we can reduce the danger of this military, eventual military aspect of nuclear activities together. We must be now, because after this Russian and all this explosion of, we can say, the conflict between Israel and Iran can be delayed, but now still we have 3 months to explore, and I have some, we can say, proposal for you, Stephen, perhaps we can communicate. We have a very clear-cut proposal who can change the level of discussion about nuclear in Middle East.
Jim.
Two remarks about that. And we shouldn't forget that when it comes to economic integration, Middle East and North Africa is the least integrated region in the world. And it has been for a very long time. Less than 7% of trade flows, for example, are between the countries of the region. There are many, many reasons for that. No need to get into them now, we have no time. But it's a fact. So whatever you want to do, you're starting from a very low base. Do not underestimate the huge challenge that's involved. It's been tried for quite a long time in the context of the neighborhood policy. In the past, the Southern neighborhood policy, without much success. So much to do there. Secondly, the single most important thing that Europe can do in terms of moving forward, whether it be on economy, on security guarantees, or the rest, for me it's very clear, is to regain credibility in the fundamental conflict in this region, which is between Israel and Palestine. The sooner or we can get to a balanced position, which we once had years ago on that, the better. The prospects for it are not good, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying. As for Trump whisperers, good luck.
We haven't talked about the Indians yet.
And
it's perhaps too late to bring in IMEC as a sort of corridor which would intersect with the north-south corridor about which the Kremlin and Tehran have made an agreement, it seems, but which could add another element of spice for sure to a hot Middle East already. I would like to thank Majid Golpur in particular for his ideas, presenting them to us, to Jim, of course, for commenting on them and offering his own views on matters which relate to the entire region and Europe's role in it. I am left more confused, perhaps, at a higher level as to what the EU should really do in this set of circumstances, because it's a very tall order indeed, and it requires many hands to make this light work. We will no doubt return to these issues before too long, and certainly before the snapback enters into the equation in real time. Thanks again to both of you, to all the attendees for participating. We look forward to welcoming you at our future webinars and seminars at CEPS. Bye-bye.
thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Meshi.